presents Irina Baturevich, co-founder of NGO media project Chytomo, book reviewer. Hello, Irina, and also to my left, Liliia Omelianenko, co-founder of the publishing house Vydavnytstvo, and Anatoliy Dnistrovyi, a writer and artist, member of the Ukrainian PEN club. And virtually we're supposed to have Andrey Kurkov, president of the Ukrainian PEN Center, and you also writer Orlova from Vivat agency. And our idea was to discuss how the pandemic conditions through the prism of writing and publishing could look. But before we start discussing the after effects of this pandemic, let us have a human touch, answer the question how the pandemic influenced your work and your publishing work, emotionally also. In the emotional dimension, we'll discuss that and work. Let's start with emotions and how the emotions affected you. Maybe they didn't. So are there any volunteers to answer that question? Well, it's a very sad question. Well, that was a bad situation. That pandemic was. In fact, when it all started, first of all, our publishing house had some kind of an inertia. We were struggling for a couple of months. Still, we went on now. We counted on sales in the bookshops, online sales to some extent for 4 months or something. We didn't really feel the effect, but then it became very sad indeed, because very frustrating. There was that feeling like there's no tomorrow. It was very difficult morally because that coincided with the lockdown and we could not leave the premises. And we worked from home, and we very strictly would stick to the rules, and we were trying to rethink our future, and that rethinking took us 3 or 4 months. That was a very depressing period for our publishing house. At some point we would think of closing down because closure, because we were accumulating debts and postponing some projects, and we were lacking the money to continue operations, and that was the real outcry, cry for help in the social media. That was in the autumn. Anatoliy Dnistrovyi, perhaps you have a funnier story. Yes. 8 months ago, I made a blog on that culture plus COVID-19 makes 19. That was the name. It was dynamic for business people. The dynamics is different. It's their element. It's so much faster with them. But for creative people, of course, we can work from home. But there was that feeling of the time loop and stasis, and I had an injury to my knee, and I couldn't move much. That was a coincidence, but nevertheless, I understood one simple thing, because offline life became inaccessible practically for all the people, at all the levels. It became a privilege, a nostalgic remembrance, and I understood that any crisis like this context with the pandemic and then with the lockdown that appeared, on the other hand, that was a chance to upgrade all the culture, all the sectorally to digitalize, sectorally to go for the video content, because the video content is now essential, because any kind, big work, a poem, an article, any comment, that could be all done in infographics through a video. And my message was this. We were late in realizing that we had to start posting videos on YouTube back in 2013. In 2015 already I discerned the threats. They would block some toxic media operating from Russia, but YouTubing was open, basically. That was another form of penetration for different notions, imperial, bad notions, and that was consumed by the audience like fast food. And I was trying to tell the authorities that something had to be done with Ukrainian YouTube and to expand that and all that. That story, unfortunately, with lockdown, people wouldn't realize fully, because there was just one Renaissance Foundation, an international foundation, to support this video content. My logic was in this. Here's my logic. This is something that makes you visible. And to be visible, you have to do something on video. It's a cascade. It's a cascade and some video things, visual things. There are some writers, there are some printers of the text, but we're in the situation when this is not enough. This is the old form of intellectual socialization. It should be some kind of it should be added to a digitalized video as a priority number one for the galleries. So the galleries, to survive, they have to be a media in full capacity. Video content is book is a story, a magazine is a story. We can keep listing this, but to cut a long story short is that there are some supportive programs for that. Everyone goes for that, but the audience is very defocused. The algorithms of YouTube are changing, especially in last 3 months. But this is another stage. It's a stage of consolidation for certain aesthetic views of platforms, values, intellectual values for different actors in the markets to mobilize, to get together as one entity. For 5 publishing houses, they can create a coalition with a coalition platform with podcasting and everything to make it a full swing medium. Here's my message. It's about time when we consolidate. This is the emotion about solidarity, and the first conclusions about the pandemic from Anatoliy Dnistrovyi and Irina. I would like to greet you. In fact, it is very interesting that all the experiences mentioned earlier, we had that understanding that we were supposed to be emotional. This is about our work and the things we were trying to revive. This lockdown and all the pandemic was helping us unite. Not all of us, but it is about getting together. And from the very beginning of the lockdown, many people succeeded in understanding that the International Institute of Book that I represent, it's an institution. It was very difficult when all the stakeholders and players of the market were much disoriented, absolutely disoriented without that financial buffer. The creative businesses all lack that, but especially the publishers. We had to respond, providing assistance, timely and effective assistance. Not any assistance can be effective, even if there's some direct revenues, contributions, requests. We had the reset time because I could feel it very definitely, the strategizing process that they started in the Ministry of Culture. That was a bit late, but not too late. We were supposed to have some roadmap by the time of lockdown, speaking of cultural policy and publishing policies. They started that process, and simultaneously we realized that we had no studies to help the sector with the most sensitive points, because people know where it hurts, where they have the pain, but we need clear data to understand where we can interfere and how we can treat that ailment with the grants or assistance, rebates, book rebates this time, like film rebates, the same idea. At the same time, we realized how important it was for us to have the international community involved. And I'm very happy that we managed to develop some international ties. I worked for the Ukrainian Institute for 3 years now. And every trade fair, every business trip abroad would bring about some useful contacts. And we were interested to know how other jurisdictions responded, because we should not reinvent the wheel, where we have some opportunities to support the sector in an efficient way, to borrow, not to steal, mind you, to borrow. And that was solidarity and consolidation in the world. Italy and Germany and the UK, all the people who are our partners, our friends, would help us. And thanks to that, we proposed a set of programs so that I hope will be supported. We need more grants, not just the institutional support for different stakeholders and players of the market, the authors, the publishers, and other participants. And we have to stimulate people to consume the culture products, the product of culture, because the lockdown didn't change much for the consumer. I can see two online participants who have joined us. Andrey, Kurkov, president of the Ukrainian PEN Center, writer Orlova, manager of Vivat publishing house. It's very difficult for me to see Julia from where I sit, but I would like to ask you both how the pandemic influenced your work. It's not about figures, it's about emotions. How you fared through the pandemic, and now, let's say after the pandemic, relatively speaking, of course. I can start. Julia. So, yes, ladies first. Speaking of the emotions, yes, it was very important for us. I understand that nobody is interested in publishing. People are interested in authors, and the readership are interested in presentations and seeing the author, meeting the author, talking to the author. And when we stopped presentations in our country, that affected very badly our promotion of the books, and we started looking for some ways out of this situation. It seems to me that we introduced a very interesting systemic development, and I would like to discuss it here, because perhaps we have something to be proud of. First of all, I would like to share that we introduced this work with international authors, I would like to share some slides with you. Well, let's go through the slides in the principal part of our discussion. This is an introductory one, and Julia said that the publishing houses felt like they were unnecessary, not needed anymore, because they needed presentations and everything that goes beyond that was for the experts, for the specialists, but not for the general readership. It was difficult to realize that when the lockdown started, but it was necessary to understand it subsequently. Andrey Kurkov, what was your emotional state when the pandemic started? At first, it was very easy for me to work. The pandemic coincided with a point when I had to finish my novel. I needed solitude, and after that we would all need some support. And the pandemic killed the contact in question, and then emotionally it is a little bit difficult, because I think I have some distrust when it comes to digital communication, and this kind of communication is not that warm by videos, by YouTube, and for me it is very important to talk to people offline, like we see nowadays. And that was something that I really badly needed. It was deficiency that I felt, a vitamin deficiency. And my impression was that after the lockdown, everyone would need some treatment, or at least rehabilitation, to come back to normal life and normal communication, normal socializing, not to overstay their time in the digital space. Listening to answers, I would think of our experience at Radio Kultura. It's something very lonely. It's just you and the mic, and perhaps we didn't detect the big risks at first, but the loneliness and the loneliness and isolation for the audiences. It's not for advertisement, but I would like to share how intensively we felt that craving for literature, and for radio dramas and literary shows. After the first week of this experiment, we were overwhelmed with the search of feedback. People wanted Harperka and Michael, the dramatization from the textbook, actually, school textbook, and everyone is supposed to be fed up with it, but not to mention the hits like Two Birds with One Stone. It's another Ukrainian classic. That was when the lockdown started. That's my emotional recollection. Now, speaking of more professional results, Julia Orlova announced, and Irina Baturevich, a broader picture. The Ukrainian Book Institute used the opportunity to have some studies. So let's discuss the digital film. Then Julia Orlova, and then we'll discuss our figures and the 1.5 years of this pandemic for publishers and authors, of course. And we have those things. I have a couple of slides to illustrate that. What the lockdown changed in the behavior of our readership. I was very much astonished that abroad people started reporting on the coolness of the experience. From the US, all the statistics of online purchases of books. And people wanted to read, they were craving for reading, they found the time, because people would say, I have no time for books. And back in 2018, before the pandemic, we saw that wasn't the deficiency of deficit of time. People were not motivated. There was no reason for reading. It's a pleasure, it's a pastime, but there was no real incentive. So we need a clicker, I suppose. Thank you very much. Great. So we had that there are four studies, last year 3 this year, and regular readers stay in the same group. No new arrivals. The international picture in statistics for Italy, publishers said that already in September 2020 they had some positive dynamics in the market. 56% of regular readers, not less than once in a week. Well, perhaps this is realistic. For us, with us it's 27%. Well, I'm sorry, but it's not the case with us. And I would like to note here that people do not read more in Ukraine because of the pandemic. People were concerned with the economic situation, their future, their livelihoods. That created the tension. They wouldn't spend on the books or go to the libraries. They could not relax. They were too much agitated with the difficulties of their everyday lives. 80% of Ukrainians read every day. 8% of Ukrainians. See, for those people who read a lot every day and so forth, we can see that they also go to the sites of Jehovah's Witnesses. And they're regular readers of special books, of course. One book, or maybe more. There are 2 magazines on the site. So you have to understand that this target group, of course, they started reading more actively even, but for the rest of Ukrainians it wasn't the case. It didn't influence them. And reading was a conservative branch of industry, so in the creative industry, we were not prepared to do the engagement to have success in that engagement, to increase the percentage of readership. We have some figures as benchmarks for this kind of motivation. Correlation between success in life, the focus, the determination, and satisfaction with life. It's our research, not from the West, where you have social lives, success stories. We would think it didn't work in Ukraine, but it does. There is a study that proves that. We can look it up at our site, Ukrainian Institute of Book Institute. We can do that. You can be better satisfied with your lives. And you can see the breakdown, the motivation among those who read, and they read for their work, for their studies. People want something useful to come out of it, in addition to some spiritual gains, cultural gains. We can prove that it is good. There 13% of Ukrainians mentioned that it was good for personal development. It's very low, unfortunately. This is the trend. 48 bookshops closing with the big publishers, unfortunately. It wasn't our research, but that's the experts' evaluation. According to that, we had a bigger number of bookshops. That's the sad situation with the shutdown. In 2020, 0.28% published per capita. 0.28%. If you want to read a new book, you have to wait for 3 years to get one, to get a copy of any book, not the book of your choice. And it is interesting that you can see the dark gray and the light gray, the Ukrainian commercial books. What happened in 2013? That was the peak, and you remember what kind of rule we had in Ukraine, how the Ukrainian book was depressed. Now the situation is a bit better, but in 2020 we had a big drop. And then we can switch to Julia now. Over to you, Julia.
Julia has also sent a file. So far we can have the screen back. Now we can have advice and support by technical staff, and now we shall continue talking about the results of the pandemic, especially its impact in numbers on the sector of book publishing. We shall hear the experience of Vivat, publishing house represented by Yulia Orlova, and probably we can hear some insights that will reinforce what Irina Gavrilовich said before, or maybe alternatively we can learn of some interesting success story that will open our eyes about the impact of pandemic on book publishing business. I would like to hear from the colleagues from another side of the table who have computers whether the presentation is launched. They say yes. So Yulia, you have the floor. Yes, indeed. I would like to underline that, of course, I agree with those numbers. It's difficult to disagree with what Irina Baturevich said before. Indeed, worldwide, there is a trend for reading. I have the numbers from another perspective. I have looked that in the first half of 2021, sales of books have increased. This underlines what Irina said before. On the other hand, sales of books in Italy have increased 44%. In the US, they increased in first semester of 2021 compared to 2020 by 18%. And they have also a big market. You can imagine what kind of money is that. Regretfully, in Ukraine, it is not like that. And this is regretful. This is a regret because worldwide there is a trend for slowing down of life. Due to psychological overload, there is such a trend for slow life, and for us, this is an example that we can catch this trend and also sell and publish and sell more books because people slow down and they read more. I would like to say, if to speak about 2020, for Vivat it was not so bad because we have published even more books compared to 2019 due to institutional support. By 25% we published more because we received the support. I'm grateful for that. However, the final beneficiary is the reader. The end user, the reader, was the end beneficiary. We cannot say this is just one indicator, which is important, because I would like to say that preparation of a book to publication, it's a lengthy process. In 2020, we had to practically by 70% we had to reduce purchasing of new copyrights. We had to, regretfully, we had to refuse Ukrainian authors, quite many denials to Ukrainian authors, because I could not predict my activity and I did not want to sign contracts. And with no prediction whether whether I'm capable to publish that book. As I said before, the sales did not decline in about publishing house, the sales volume, yet the other publishing houses have declined their sales, even by 50%. And of course, this is a vicious circle. We get into the vicious circle when sales decline. We have to make discounts, and when we make great discounts, then there is a devaluation of the book itself, and also there is a decline of profitability of the publishing house. Then we lack money to pay salaries, and this causes the publishing house to close down. We don't have precise statistics, yet I hear that number, that 48 publishing houses have stopped, have ceased to exist. What to do about it? We also have some good findings. What did we do in Vivat? What I would like to say about, what I'm proud of, what I would like to share as an example of the possible way out. Maybe that example is useful. We have introduced a series of interviews with authors, and when there was lockdown, we began that because we believe a presentation is important. We began interviews with authors because I understand that author is most important person for the book. And we have a slide where we have 4 interviews that we held with no mask. Even with John Bolton, we could make the interview with Chytomo and Forbes magazine. We have introduced several clubs with an author and a journalist from our side, and even from radio culture. We had an interview which is very good. I would like to present a psychological club where we recommend books, also the ones of foreign authors and domestic authors. We invite psychologists, and I believe this is a good format when we both attract attention and also we tell, not only attract attention to the book, also we tell about the book. That's in the format of discussion, in the format of lively discussion. I believe this is interesting. And also what I'm proud of, we have introduced the institution of ambassadors. If we cannot involve the author to tell about the book, this can be done by the ambassador. We have the example of Invisible Women. We have more than one book of this kind. We refer to the opinion leader. Now this is Olga Rudneva. We send her a book. She reads the book, and then she writes. If she likes the book, she writes a feedback. Then we make the super, which can be removed. It doesn't spoil the book, yet if there is an ambassador of the book, then he or she advertises the book in the social networks and so on. I would like to demonstrate this is not only for this book. We had several books already, and we keep working. this is good for the book and for the end user, because we change the vector, because a publishing house goes to the reader. I believe it's nice when the opinion leader or a star or a celebrity advertises the book. This is also social social burden for the celebrities. Yet I'm proud of it. I believe this is a wonderful thing which can be introduced by other publishing houses. That's it. Thank you for this experience. It demonstrates an interesting thing which happened to many of us, could happen and did happen during pandemic. We discussed between ourselves the hunger for personal communication. If there is no offline communications, yet it's important to communicate with someone personally, at least online, to receive a book personally for me, for my taste, something which can entertain myself. What interesting experience the publishing house Vydavnytstvo has gained. I invite Liliia to discuss the numbers. You mentioned that there was a moment when the publishing house was on the threshold of closure. Could you tell more about it, or just generally could you summarize by way of numbers as well as lessons learned during the pandemic? As I said before, in the beginning of the pandemic, for several months we had stability, everything was on the paved road. Then we felt the lag. We could sell fewer books, or people paid less. At the same time, people were not confident of tomorrow. In the very beginning of pandemic, we were rescued as we finished our work on the cult graphical novel Chytomo, and it was published by ourselves. Correct me if I'm wrong. In April, May, exactly when we had pandemic starting. Honestly speaking, we lived through the summer thanks to Mouse. In parallel, we also had graphical novel Pinyan. It was also well received by the public. A graphical adaptation of the diary of Anna Frank is a wonderful book. Finally, the animation movie was made, and it was shown on several film festivals. I don't know if it goes to Ukrainian movie theaters, and surely you can watch it soon somewhere. On that wave, we spent the summer. In parallel, we understood that very strong growth of online sales. We have nearly stopped receiving any receipts from the stores, offline stores. At the same time, if book store they did not yet have online store. It was about 10% of the overall reports. During the pandemic, it was 95%. Actually, it was no point to supply books into the offline stores. Even we began to return from offline books those books that we have run out of the stock for, in order to sell them online. We understood we are on the threshold of survival, and yet unless we create a new product accordingly, we shall lose attention, and it will be even worse. Therefore, our strategy was to publish even more books, though it may look a surprise. For that, we needed some kind of financial support, and we began to actively look for sponsors. We actively filed for all possible grants we could. We began to take projects by orders. For example, we made huge project. It was the first one for a publishing house of that type for UNDP. We did 4 social comics, and we did those in the record time. We filed for the grant, we won the grant, And from scratch, we made Ukrainian social comics. For us, it was the first experience of that kind, yet it was successful, and the result was good for the UN. Those were about danger of violence in the family, about children, against children of different age groups, rehabilitation of the military after the war, if there is any life after people return from the war, and how they worked with that problem. And youth on the contact line, young people on the border with Russia, how they are trying to survive in those depressed conditions they find themselves in. We had a large team working on comics, we coordinated all that. And after that we had even more orders. After that we made a book by order, and also we have it in our product line. This is Feminism and the City. We did it by order of Henrik Björl. It was also successful, and we felt strength that we can do it with high quality, efficiently and quickly. We just began to move into those directions where we did not allow ourselves to move in. We were afraid to take the risk, and actually it was useful. This was of benefit for us. The series of lockdowns, of course, it had the effect. In order to increase sales, we had to make several rounds of discounts of online sales, because we face the problem that in spite of being sold by other bookstores, it's good. On the other hand, those bookstores, they themselves lacked resources for survival, and accordingly they did not pay that money to us, and we had a very huge accounts receivable. It looks good, having good sales of books, and yet we could not receive the cash. And this problem still remains. We had quite even big market players who have debts for more than 3 months for the summer periods. We have the accounts receivable, overdue accounts receivable from them. Speaking of the numbers, in 2019 we published 9 books. We are a small publishing house. We cannot speak of such numbers as Yulia, cannot operate such numbers because this is even quite a lot for us. In the year 2020 we published 12 books, and as of the first semester 2021 we also published 12 books. This is a net of parallel projects we did by the order, because some of those products were for free circulation, available electronically, and cannot be sold. I can say that for us, in the final outcome, we could get out of crisis with grants and sponsors, as well as diversification of products. We worked in different directions, and I hope that in the future we shall work in the same way, and this will help us also in the future. I am listening to the story of Yulia and Liliia, and I think that all those people who wrote articles at the beginning of pandemic of what to do during quarantine while you sit at home, live in a parallel reality, because the entire sector of culture, my colleagues from the media, as well as book publication sector, they were working hard. From March 2020 they started to work hard and never stopped. Also the authors will have the floor. Also I would like to ask a question to the publishing houses representatives. I came from the book forum. The publishers discussed the change of habits of readers, how they buy. Actually, street vending does not work. Online purchases have affected the structure of the market. There is a problem that even myself, as a buyer of books, I can see very low prices offered by some book stores, even below what we can find on the websites of publishing houses. Will not quote the names and amounts. I don't have a deep understanding. Could you please tell of your practice? What did you face? How did pandemic affect how people buy the books, and who is selling the books, and where, and for how much? Maybe Yulia can start, and Liliia will continue. Yes, indeed. I would not like to discuss the problem of Arsenal and Forum because, of course, surely we had too high expectations. It was important for us that those festivals take place offline, and of course, when we did not receive everything what we expected from Arsenal and Forum, it was a regret for us. Yet those festivals are needed. They are badly needed because for our publishing house it's not about sales or profits. This is an opportunity to present the book. To me personally, this is an opportunity to listen to the readers face to face, because personally I rarely meet the readers, mainly when I myself walk into the bookstore. When I hear a lot of feedback from the readers, what I hear on Arsenal, to me it was useful as a publishing house representative to understand whether we have a good we go right way or wrong way. And to me, this is an opportunity to promote the author and promote the book. To me, this is opportunity. I insist that festivals are needed for every publishing house. With the organizers of festivals, we are on the same boat. We require some common platform, to build a common platform that we go to the reader and we make all festivals more up to date, so that on one hand we maintain the tradition, preserve the tradition, on the other hand to make them up to date and well tuned to the new habits of the readers. Yes, indeed, this is true, and this is not in use, that people buy on the net, and it does not replace, however, the festivals. This is what I think. Could you please continue, Liliia? If to compare 2020, when we had no festivals at all, the only thing Zaporizhia took place, then and that's it. And this year, one can understand that this year is a wow, because especially in fall we have one festival following another. On the other hand, yes indeed, most of festivals turned into, it's more like a literature festival rather than a site for sales. Yet, nevertheless, for publishing houses it's important to have sites for sales, and there is a question depending on the fair that was held, what kind of strategy of promotion of that fair, and how does it happen, because there are questions to some fairs. Generally speaking, compared to pre-COVID times, sales on such fairs have dropped two times and three times. Of course, they don't buy it like that, because they buy on the net and they try to buy with a big discount. And there is a problem with some sites that indeed do a dumping, and therefore readers are not ready to buy books for the full price. On one hand, yes, it's good for the publishing house that some number of books was really purchased. Yet in the long run, if people are used to the cheap price of the books, they're not ready to pay real money of the real price of those books, up to the real price. If they order through the website, those are boom sales, big sales, for two reasons. Always we make pre-ordering of our books, and this is much cheaper than the final price, and after that it's not possible to buy at the same price in the bookstores. Therefore our readers are used to it. They make the pre-order. It works for us, and it's a strategy. If we make really good discounts, however, we invest a lot and we don't practice discounts. Yet when it happens, we indeed have good sales. Of course, one has to think for the future, how to compensate those insufficient sales on festivals with any other things. Well, Arsenal was best for us. We are happy about Arsenal, and we believe that it has ideal combination, ideal balance of the events, and the way the publishing houses are represented. This year, for example, of course, much fewer people, and yet we felt the space, and people who came to Arsenal, they could easily, with no rush, with no crowd, to buy those books in a thoughtful manner. To say what they buy from us. Mostly they bought classics. The top books that are sold worldwide were also sold from us. Also, Ukrainian product is on sale, and yet it's not a big percentage of Ukrainian product among our product line. We shall discuss the outcomes of the pandemic, which is still lasting, maybe with the numbers from the perspective of the writer. There is online connection of Andrey Kurkov. He will continue the discussion. Maybe Andrey, you can tell us about your success at the times of the pandemic. How many novels did you write? How many novels did you translate? And what happens to the writers, to the authors over this time? Actually, I believe that everything has slowed down compared to what was before, except for one phenomenon. Abroad, they have efflorescence of private readers clubs. Those private readers clubs of active readers, 15, 20 or 10 people, they began to access with direct questions to the authors, requesting them also online to connect for discussion of the books they have read. I believe this trend would be not so bad, also be of good support in Ukraine, in order to, if we could stimulate such readers clubs to make them engines, drivers, especially for dissemination of books of Ukrainian authors. As for my books, I have finished the second novel about Kiev of 1919, Heart is Not Meat. This is continuation of Samson and Nadia, and that novel is expected to be published in a month in the Folio publishing house. Now I work on the non-fiction. I don't know where the book will be published, whether it's a book or something of a smaller format. Translations still continue, and life goes on the way it is, and yet it has slowed. Quite many publishing houses have postponed by half a year or 1 year the publication of new books. Not all of the books, but those books that they believe that they would require more promotion with participation of the author or the authors, and those books were delayed. And now there is another activation of sales of copyright and also preparation of new translations. By the way, I'm pleased to say that in America, Harvard University Press initiated Ukrainian series. 4 books are pending or nearly published, among them Monte Green of Vladimir Hrofienko, Stanislav Aseyev, Mariana Kianovska. In principle, regardless of pandemic, promotion of Ukrainian literature in the English-speaking market is taking place. I hope the earlier the pandemic is over, the sooner the normal rhythm of the global book market will restore. I would like to say that in principle I hear a lot of interesting today about the new ways of advertising and promotion of books, as it was discussed by Liliia Orlova. I believe that we need to think about new micro format of promotion of books, or the book event, micro formats, and simply the new formats, because indeed the pandemic, which is prolonged, nearly killed those formats that we are used to. The authors and publishers are used to. Not only tastes are changing, also mentality is changing of the readers and mentality of people under the influence of this of the pandemic. We need to understand what will be more interesting for them, and we should run ahead. We should propose some new formats to them, not only readers' clubs, maybe something else, in order to mark the moment of transition from the usual pre-COVID age to the post-COVID age that nobody is used to.
This is a conversation about microformats initiated by Andrey. That reminds me of one of the projects of the Ukrainian PEN. That trip to Chernihiv under this big project called Approximation, Nabližення, with one library and readers of the same library on one side and on the other side, writers working for the audience of 30 people, but the very responsive, a very rewarding audience, and you talk to the readers and who they have the fine-tuned and focused questions for you, which is very precious for any writer. So Anatoliy Dnistrovyi, I know that you have some translations published and the new text re-edited. Can you tell us about your results a little bit? I do not want to talk much about my precious self, and we are forgetting about some things in the lockdown situation. Memory, because of this white noise, the information foam, let's say, we start forgetting. There was this big governmental program on a reset of school libraries. Let me remind you that I have visited over the period of 2 years several libraries, and my impression was that nothing would change there. For 20 years they were very old-fashioned, with the smell of melt in the libraries, and with a program for reset that would be a very good thing. With the schools, 16,000 in number. A school library is like this room, approximately, and I can imagine that up to 20%, this is something along the lines of TOT for teachers and so forth. But as a child, I would go to a school library and borrow a book. In that Ukrainian library, you cannot just Ukrainian classics. Some captive publishing houses can do that, but you can also enter library with mind-blowing book, non-fiction, an international bestseller. You can come there, go there with a great amplitude, starting with a book for a 6-year-old child, and this idea, which is just an idea, but you can actually mount this wave. You are our landing party. You are the Ukrainian Book Institute. You can use the figures, some statistics. We can structurally design this program. There's room for being creative. For the first time, I had shrinking circulation for my prose. I started in 2001 with a prose book when I had 2,000 circulation. This is small. I always had 2,000 to 4,000. Now it is a great, a loud drop, 500 copies, but nevertheless, with Żupanski publishing house, we do the third re-edition, additional issue with all the trilogy, Roman Pacek trilogy for youth. And I had that hobby of last 20 years. It was interviewing world intellectuals, historian, philosophers, Timothy Snyder, Roman Shpurlyuk, and it's my hobby since my postgraduate times. And I could not find that, and I just buried that project, and Common Book wrote to me, I love creative publishers. When come to you, they come to you and say, show us what is in your drawers, your lab, and with Diana Klochko, I think she is an editor, a divine editor. She is a genius. She designs book in terms of concept, and she would come to me and say, what is in your lab? And she saw the essays of mine, and there are some new plots. I have concluded a new trilogy. I'm not in any haste with it because I can see that the genre literature writes not supreme, but it's economically more feasible, and I can realize that and appreciate that. But I am a great champion of auteur and œuvre and such things, and œuvre and auteur prose. Even if the reader is extinct, that's my prose because I like what people write about themselves. The B-52 in Czech Republic, it was published in 2021 because of the pandemic, touring Czech Republic, lecturing there, so forth. And they would invite me as early as 2015. They wanted to invite me, but somehow I couldn't. I cannot say that anything is changing. Another point is that it seems to me that it is about time when we have not some big slices of cake. Everyone wants one's share. I think this is over, and we have the time of instrumental niche projects that can work for a certain niche audience. And I'm very much excited for Ukraine to publish some intellectual Ukrainian non-fiction, because I understand that translated literature is very important and very necessary, but translated literature cannot sell to any other country, because this is absurd. So the publishers should globalize and should propose things, because for the world we can be interesting with our text. First of all, what Ukraine will do and is doing, and that is very important in my opinion. Thank you very much, Irina Baturevich, is telling me that there's a response on the school libraries. Yes, Irina, the floor is yours. I'm very much satisfied and reassured now. Anatoliy expressed this idea, which is completely in unison with this readings development strategy that we drafted and submitted to the Ministry for all the approvals. We have to collaborate according to the strategy with the Ministry of Education and Science. It's not terribly PC, but I can admit that it is very difficult. The replenishments and update of the book collections of school libraries and Ministry of Education and Science. If anybody is on the stream from that ministry, we are very much open for cooperation. We want to cooperate. You can make a breakthrough in this effort to make reading more popular, because we need a reconciliatory board. They're not prepared. That's their communication from the Ministry of Education and Science. I'm sure we'll be able to present our case properly and convincingly, because without a school library where we can create this hub for reading, for leisure, and extracurricular reading, and the Ukrainian book, the same thing as we have with the library this year. We did that, it is necessary for everyone. This is good for the publishers and also for the scholars, for their benefit, because how can you teach people and make people love books if you have just curricular efforts to make people read? I think Irina has to rush. In a smaller group we can discuss it further. The book festivals, the literary festivals, and other online and offline events, and the hybrid formats when we have this combination of offline and online activities. In this next round, I invite you, all the panelists, offline and online alike, how we can detect the change, what kind of change, and Yulia started discussing that. Now the writers should share their experience. Andrey Kurkov can start at the literary festivals and your writer's experience for the time of pandemic. I am not going to any festivals anymore, and I don't remember whether I would be invited offline to participate in any event to present my books. In particular, we are living through the times of shrinking of that influence exercised or produced by the festivals over the readership. And I watched the Arsenal book fair and the forum of publishers in Lviv, and we have to change something, to invent new formats. And I don't think we can continue with the good old formats. So it's either we kill the interest to book fairs altogether with the book selling events, and we'll have just the presentation part, and the publishers cannot possibly make any profit or to be break even for that matter. And the pandemic is over. Well, it stopped when it is over, actually. Then we'll receive some new signals for new informants, and that will be the time when we will start this new life with the books, with the writers, with the publishers involved in this new lifestyle. And I can see what is happening in Europe. The semi-council, some big book fairs and book shows. It's the same problem. We just have to watch it closely. Frankfurt book fair. I hope that everything is all right with the Odessa International Festival, because the sponsors now to be found in Kiev and Odessa, they have arrived. And we have to use everything as an opportunity. And this new pause with a new wave of the virus, we have to use to somehow create the new formats and the new contents for the nearest time when we are free from all the limitations, the sanitary and otherwise related to this pandemic. Listening to Andrey's discussion, I remembered following Anis Martin Lugan. I translated her novel this year, and she would write a lot about the Leko festival. They had a big system. They're not as centralized as we are in Ukraine, but all the regions have their own big events and big centers. And France at some point started going offline and coming back offline. With that author and her colleagues, with all the autograph sessions in smaller towns, out of the doors, it was open air. We have to adjust. Maybe it's not an ideal way, but listening to what you discuss, the Leipzig book fair. Before the pandemics, they wouldn't sell anything at their stands, and you can remember that it is always a combined bookshop, and that. But the stands, you would sign a book and talk to the author, sign a copy. Perhaps something of the kind we can expect in the nearest future, but. It is not my show. I do not want to steal it or monopolize the discussion. We're discussing the changes in the festival life, literary life, in writer's experience. And after Kurkov, Anatoliy Dnistrovyi, please share your experience, things you lived through when all the festivals, or almost all of them, were cancelled or went to online festivals. So indeed, it's a new phenomenon. I participated in one international, one Ukrainian online. I participated in that, and it was a refreshing experience. Well, very intimate. It's kind of a ghetto. All the Muppet Show. The boxes, and you do not see the response. Andrey is right, telling us that this live communication charges you with the energy, and there was no energy there. But there's an interesting point. We had all those intervals in the lockdown session. And I started traveling a little bit in Chernihiv. I have been visiting since 1995 in different formats, with Andrey Kurkov here, with Andrey Kokotyuk, with Yuri Pokolchuk, later Yuri Pokolchuk, Larissa Denisenko, in different formats. We had presentations there. That's how it looked. Two teachers of the Ukrainian literature come to a library, one camera and two librarians. So we could have more writers than the guests, and it looked like a fridge with the frozen semi-cooked products. And we had that festival, this plenty, like in Kurkov, that's Broadway, Peace Avenue, and the Green Stage. There they have this big offline with the sales of the books, and you have about 80 people listening to you. It sounds like a miracle. Maybe passers-by, some of them were, but still, it's a new experience to me. Another point, when we had that quite recently, a dynamic audience, Chernihiv always was a sleeping town. Like in Ichnya, a district town, all the club would come to you, all the community center will be there, because there's nothing happening, and people just want to see living writer. The news come from different periods, like what happened 7 years ago, and that happened to a big writer, Serhiy Zhadan, Oksana Zabushko, some other celebrity, and it happened 5 years ago, in fact. There's a different dimension to it, and the biggest battle is over the district centers. The regional capitals are fed up, they are spoiled, too few people come. It depends on the sponsors and the organization, but from the point of view of book market, I think we have to fight for smaller towns, district centers, where we have no bookshops or latent bookshops, obsolete, old-fashioned. Now we have to fight for another level. It's a big stratum. It's quite a readership. If we come back to the Bolshevik times, I remember some of the Soviet times, they would have a copy of a book on cybernetics, computer science, or Albert Camus, Alien, something that was hidden there. 50 copies of Albert Camus or Jordan sold in a book. There's a copy. There's a person who needs a copy, like one of my relatives, my grandma's brother. He was a great reader of historical prose at the big library, and he would read just that. He was a great fan. And that is a dimension that we cannot see, we cannot realize. It is not monitored, it is not followed in any way. It is there, and it seems to me that we have to come up with this interesting program. This is systemic, was supposed to be. It should be a governmental program. How we should enter the district center through that municipal program or something, but what comes to my mind is this municipal program. It is active in many European countries, EU countries, different elected officials, local politics. People come and go, but there are some people, some things, which stay. This is about strategizing for the future, but I would like to believe in that, believe in such a future and such an opportunity. We have to put it down and listen to your discussion of the governmental program. There's this small cultural capital. This is the Ukrainian Cultural Fund. Slabutich is the winner of this year, and we have this ad on our radio culture network. This is bigger than district capital, district center. We had interesting predecessors on the Mariupol. First had some odd events, then they started introducing platforms like Two platform, which was opened by people from the Donetsk, the IDPs, and this year and before that we had Gogol Fest in Mariupol, and at the beginning of this autumn we had a big classical music festival. My colleagues from the classical music room would come back and say that all the concerts were full to capacity. And now have a literary festival. Part of our colleagues, we saw that on the social media. Some people were traveling with them to Kiev for this event. So the publishing experience, perhaps Julia Orlova can start, and then Liliia Omelianenko can pick up. I don't think there will be this miraculous moment when everything is over and the crisis is over. I don't think this is the time of turbulence, and flexibility is everything, is key. Unless we adjust to such changes, and unless we offer to our readership some kind of state-of-the-art techniques, very modern, very aspiring, very spearheading, let's say, we will lose this battle, because this is a festival problem. There's nothing modern. Yes, I agree. I would agree that when you talk to people by Zoom or any kind of through any kind of medium. It is not that much charged with energy, human energy, but I would not imagine taking an interview or May mask. I'm not particularly grateful to the lockdown, to the situation when we can actually reach out to people we wouldn't think of normally as our interlocutors and our contacts. So the principal message is this: we have to combine certain traditions available with the new state-of-the-art techniques and methods to maintain the festivals, to preserve them. Liliia, please. When the lockdown started, we were thinking, well, everyone goes online, we go online, and we have this book. She did it. There are many authors in that book. There are 2 volumes of all the narratives coming from lady authors, lady characters, people writing about themselves. And it took us 2 months. When we started it, it was just the beginning of the lockdown. Not everyone was fed up, and we had lots of views, lots of comments, packs and loads, and people wanted to talk to the authors. That was accessibility, and the statistics slowly but steadily started to go down. It did not really depend on the actual popularity of the authors. We had too many online events, and people were confused and lost. This event today, that event tomorrow, and we understand that even if it is online, you do not understand just how engaged this person is. Everyone is working from home, using their cell phones, their PCs, and they can cook, they can go about their business at home. And I don't imagine any people just sticking to the presentations one after one. Literary festivals have no such distractions. When people arrive, when they see you, they listen to you, they wouldn't go to cook away to cook something or call somebody else. And there's a lot of this white noise. Such speakers, of course, as we mentioned earlier, of course they can attract more attention. But I do not believe that online platforms can take over and forever. So, first of all, from the literary component, they are all, well, this year at least, they were extremely well organized. The presentations, the audiences full to capacity. People buy fewer books, maybe read fewer books. This is our reality, but the festivals we still need. They should be attended. We should go, but we have to understand how they are arranged, how they are organized. For instance, no names mentioned, but we cannot separate a sales point and the literary events if they are taking place in other location, especially when this site for sales you need to pay to get there, to pay a fee. This is nonsensical. It doesn't work that way. It should be a common territory, a public space which you enter with the halo of literature on your head. And yes, the literary part can work, and the point of sale wouldn't in such an arrangement. That's my opinion. So we have practically concluded 90 minutes of our time, and so we will have still some Q&A, but I'm not sure whether we can take questions online from those people who are watching us online, or let's use some other way. And let me put the final question. This contains two questions. On the one hand, it is about the principal lessons learned through this period of the lockdown of the pandemic, unfortunately. On the other hand, some possible ways of improvement. Sorry for this notion of improvement. How can we improve the writer's situation, the publisher's situation, your personal point of view for the time of pandemic, and how this should be arranged? Perhaps, Andrey, you can.
I forgot the first question. Lessons learned and ways of improvement, or what became bad at the times of pandemic. First of all, the lesson of improvement of self-discipline. I lived through it. As a writer, the author is a free person. Maybe he writes, or maybe he has coffee, or maybe doing both. And one has more time for loneliness and creativity compared to what was before. One should not chill down and to do something with that time. One cannot spend the time available for communication with actual people on Zoom. Because there is a fatigue from Zoom. First, it's a source of joy, then there is a fatigue. To me, it was a school of self-discipline. I am not sure I passed it right. I have a lot of dissatisfaction with myself. What can be improved? Irina mentioned school libraries. Anatoly mentioned communication with the Ministry for Education and Science. In several speeches or discussions, I mentioned that in Germany and Austria, or maybe other countries, there is a program which engages the writers by the Ministry of Education, and quite many German authors make money, not on the books, but speeches in schools. There are many trips, and the schedule of meetings and trips of German authors with German school children is scheduled 1 year ahead, and it crosses all the schools involved in the project. The same happens in Austria. In Austria, even they involve foreign authors. They invite not to the meetings with readers, but they invite from the Ministry of Education for travel and communication to school children. Of course, when that author speaks German. That topic must be raised, and this will help, first of all, Ukrainian authors, because Ukrainian market for Ukrainian authors is not a source of earnings, regretfully, for most of them. And supporting writers and literature is possible by supporting authors in such a way, giving them the opportunity to work also with senior grade school children or university students. It's a great idea about travels of the authors to schools. Now we can expect someone to implement that, because it of course requires a lot of systemic work. Now I propose that Yulia Orlova will continue lessons learned and proposals or ideas or insights about improvements. I would like to concentrate on what can improve our lives, because we have discussed the lessons learned for quite a while. We don't have much time for that. As I said before, to me, it's an interesting way which is a creative promotion of books. I discussed that, and this is important for me. Secondly, I will probably try to do that And it seems to me it's interesting. This is creation of mini libraries in business organizations. I believe this will be a responsibility of the owners to make the organization where there are employees so that they self-improve. Therefore, if the books are so expensive these days, I believe the owners, business owners, must take care of the employees and create mini libraries on the companies. I believe this is the new step that will help. Further on, it seems to me that one has to make seminars on curricula, because it's obvious that we all like to study, and I believe that working in that direction is necessary. I would like to focus attention on interaction with the state, because we don't have lobbying, or it's insufficient, and I would like ourselves to review more questions about publishing houses. I can speak about tax exemptions from corporate income tax, and also the other things. I will not mention for the sake of time. We speak of publishing houses and the authors. Maybe we should not forget of the system of distribution of books, book retail, non-book retail. I believe that book rebate, as discussed by Irina Baturevich, is appropriate. Rebate is compensation of a percentage from sales. And nowadays, when every fifth bookstore is closed because bookstores cannot sustain the burden of rental payments, I believe such a book rebate will be appropriate. And of course, I will speak more of it. And I believe that this should be discussed more. I would like to say also that we have a big problem. I don't know if it is true in Kiev. And here in the east, we really feel it, because we have Russian-speaking region. We have quite a lot of Russian literature, Russian language literature, counterfeit and smuggling of those. Generally, piracy problem is important. Not only electronic piracy, also counterfeit. We have the border nearby, and indeed the books are shipped illegally. That fighting against smuggling and counterfeit is impossible only by publishing houses. Indeed, one has to unite with the government, and we need government support. It's not financial, it's simply effective. It simply must be effective. I would like to say a few words about support of libraries, not only book, generally of libraries. It's a regret yes, there is fungi on books, and yet there are a lot of new books in many publishing houses, and if that program is transparent and keeps operating, I believe that publishing houses could connect to it, would be eager to connect to it, because its support is important for us, and we could change that for the better, also for school libraries and public libraries as well. Probably those steps, this is what we have to do now, and this is what will improve the situation in publishing houses. as well as the situation in the field of sales of books and promotion of books. I believe we are all in one boat, including the authors and publishing houses and the government and the readers. I believe that those steps I have proposed will improve the situation, and this should be discussed. If someone has any other opinion, I would like to hear that. Thank you. Shall we continue to share lessons learned 3 weeks, and then it will return back? And the main moment which really worked for the depression, that in the beginning we did not expect this for take long. We had no idea of it. Therefore, the first main lesson: if something changes sharply, in the same way one has to start doing. There is no point to wait or expect or hope that everything returns back. If it comes back soon, yet you will have new ideas for implementation, which is an advantage. About the authors, I would like to support Andrey, saying that our Swedish and Danish authors whom we talked to said they have a similar scheme, and they are paid by libraries and schools, and part of their earnings is indeed those presentations in schools and libraries, and yet this is paid accordingly. I don't know if it's realistic, because libraries hardly have money to pay the authors, and school of course also, because people are used to free visits, and we need to have a different approach. Another important thing is that in any difficult situation, it's good to unite. Regretfully, whether we want it or not, the publishing market is very fragmented. All the publishing houses fight for itself. If it's necessary to lobby for the interests, we have also fragmentation. Everybody is selfish, and accordingly, one has to create some associations of publishing houses of every kind that in some fields will lobby the interested before the start, organize the events, and also organize some other things that can be interesting for the readers. This is also true for other market players. For example, we did not develop rules of the game for the book stores. There is no unified policy of bookstores and publishing houses. The book stores try to absorb all the sales, and it's difficult to compete against them for the publishing houses. Therefore, there must be something to regulate the work in order to help each other, rather than make obstacles to each other. I would like to support Yulia, saying that same about the bookstores. One thing is to unite. One needs to create programs, the government programs, or sponsor, or investor, or grantor programs to open up, to motivate business to open bookstores in smaller cities, smaller towns, on some concessional conditions. In Mariupol, as we say, there are quite many events. Open Book Fest takes place. Yet Mariupol does not have a single bookstore. The same we can say about Chytomo, and I think that the same we can say about quite many places. Therefore, if there is any program of EBRD or someone else to involve small business to open bookstores, this would be helpful, as this would expand the distribution network. Yulia began to speak of it. I remember yesterday's telephone connection of Nastya Yevdokimova about Open Book Festival in Mariupol, and Nastya said Mariupol has no bookstores, and one of our listeners has called. She lives in Mariupol, and she blamed us that actually they have dozens of bookstores, and this is defamation. Yet I went to Mariupol and I didn't see any. I went to Mariupol and we talked to the locals and the organizers of various events, and we were told that there are no bookstores. Maybe some piracy, counterfeit, maybe some street vendors. we have to go to Mariupol and check what happens to books, and book vendors. Ending this discussion, I invite Anatoliy Dnistrovyi to finalize this part of lessons learned and improvements, and then we shall have 10 minutes for Q&A from the audience. I believe we had a very good cross-country discussion. We suggested many ideas. If they are implemented, they become systemic, and of course one has to do it. I'm convinced it's not necessary to give out money. The government must create rules of the game for everyone. If you look at support, at what the governments of Europe did for 2 difficult years, for the tourist industry and for creative industry and for cultural industry, this is quite a lot of money. Germany, Austria, France, I don't remember the numbers, I have them somewhere in some file, but those are serious, very serious system of support. In our case, nobody did an effort, and actually the sector has sustained that strike. I'm looking at a publisher as a risk group representative. I'm afraid for those people because they operate in terrible conditions. They support the company and they support the people and the wages, and this is reality. This is very dangerous situation. This idea, if you can understand me, it's important to think the way the budget of the country is prepared. Why it is important to understand that budgetary process? Because one has to know when with certain initiatives and proposals to access the government so that those are included. That package of proposals should have been formed in May. In the month of September, nobody will enter the budgetary process. Those guys in the parliament, of course, will work on their own issues, the amendments and so on, because they have more global things in terms of finance. As for the sectoral initiatives, we should have entered the budgetary process, at least those entities that could have influence it, representing the sector. Those proposals should have been formed and filed in May, end of June, middle of June. Because you may understand that all that will be in the vacuum. In fall, we speak of concept things, and those concept things are transferred to analytical language and proposals. Such a package will only be ready by next year. Actually, if we think, if we imagine, if all that is launched, we speak of the prospects of the year 2022. Not even 22, it's of 23. In the year 22, it will be only the start of such things. Therefore, it's important to have influence agents representing the sector, to convey that into the heads of our government representatives. This is important to have influential actors. Another question is how this can be done. Will this be some kind of consolidation of efforts, or who will that be? And this is what we should think about, because it will be like that, everybody will complain that this is bad, our life is bad, and so on and so forth. It's simply a different pattern of the process, must be. We should think as a political party, basically. This sounds awful, yet if it's a metaphor with 3 dots, yet we have time for Q&A if someone has any questions. So the colleagues will transfer the mic, if my understanding is correct. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Quite many things have been discussed about exports of our product abroad. Only Andrey has mentioned. The authors have to, because whether the publishing houses are working to promote themselves as publishing houses in the other markets, whether the translations are published, whether our infrastructure is not only limited by Ukraine, because the market is going down. The population dies out, and of course, they can read a little bit more, and the demand could increase. Whether this market is sufficient, or should we think globally? It will be interesting to hear the opinion of publishing houses as the main actors to sell the rights abroad. And editorial work with the authors, quite a lot of work that the publishing houses are doing. Actually, publishing houses don't promote themselves to the foreign markets because publishing houses are not interesting for anyone. However, our publishing house is really working with foreign publishing houses to promote Ukrainian authors. Our publishing house has sold rights to 27 countries already, worldwide. However, regretfully, mostly those were children's books. Why? Because it's easier to sell if there is not much text, and there are illustrations, and one can immediately have a look into those illustrations and take a decision whether it's interesting or it is not in a particular country. Nowadays there is a program in Ukrainian Institute of Books, and the books of our authors, the authors published in our publishing house, we have received the grant. I don't remember, maybe 5 or 6 books. For adults, will be sold abroad. We have certain achievements of this kind. The book of Vasil Stus, two or three books of Pokatyuha, and I forget there are more. Why it's not easy? Abroad, we should not only translate synopsis. Quite often they request that the whole book is translated into English language, and this is difficult and also expensive. We don't know whether they buy those rights, and we have to invest into translation of the book. This is one of the problems. It can be solved. And what we do now, of course, we would like to sell the books, the adult books for reading, books for the adults, and we have certain rights to sell. And now we translate and make synopsis. We translate 1 or 2 chapters into English language, normally into English language most often, and then we propose we can also sell the books abroad as well. I have a hypothesis that maybe Andrey Kurkov can share the experience. The books are represented all over the world, quite many translations into various languages. Maybe you can answer the question. Speaking of sales of rights, it's important to understand there are several entrances, several countries, which are the doors to a wider international readers' space. Most often for Ukrainian writers, those doors are Germany or Austria. If the book is translated, for the first time I hear it from Yulia that they require full translation into English language. I never faced that. They require 1 or 2 chapters in English language and a synopsis. I don't think we can expect from the rights owner that they will invest money into translation. Moreover, translation will be reordered by their own translators, by the publishing house which will buy the rights. I believe that in such a situation the main thing is to understand what kind of market will be easier and more efficient to enter. It's difficult to enter English language market. It's a separate story because there are 2 English-speaking markets. There are rights for UK and all countries except for US, and separate American rights. The books published in UK, South Africa and Australia do not get to the bookstores of US. according to the law on protection of domestic business interests, so that the book can be launched in English in the American market. One has to, it must be published in America or republished along with an American publishing house. For Ukraine, accessing Eastern Europe, it goes through Poland, and lately Croatia is interested of Ukrainian literature actively, and then in Eastern Europe it's via Germany. German market is watched by Italy, although it may be a surprise, and France, followed by Spain, though the Spanish language literature market is another category, and one can get it through Latin America and also better through Spain. Indeed, little time has remained. If you have any questions, please raise your hand and ask the questions. If not, we can wrap up, because we have been talking for 2 hours. This is quite a long time. We have focused on a narrow and specialized view of the impact of the pandemic on the sector from the perspective of writers and publishing houses, those who watch us online and listen online, those who have met in the hybrid podium of combined offline, Andrey Kurkov, Liliia Orlova representing Vivat, Liliia Omelianenko, publishing house Vydavnytstvo, Anatoliy Dnistrovyi, Andrey Kurkov are members of Ukrainian PEN club. In such a team, we have completed our discussion. I'm Irina Slavinskaya, executive producer of the radio. I was happy to talk to you. I'm happy that people are watching online. I wish you a continuation of the forum Creative Ukraine.